This session will be hosting representatives from thought leaders of digital library domain. This session will host one keynote and an experience sharing session and will be chaired by Dr. Ravindra Kumar Chadha. I would like to request Dr. Lisa Petritz to kindly give the sapling to our chair. Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Ravindra Kumar Chadha is a member of Governing Board of Inflibnet and Building Committees of Election Commission of India and Inflibnet. Dr. Chadha is also adjunct faculty at Panasthali Vidyapeeth University. He has worked as Additional Secretary, Parliament of India, Lok Sabha Secretariat. He was member of Indian delegation to WTO Parliamentary Conference, Geneva 2014, Inter-Parliamentary Seminar for Asian Parliaments on Preventing and Responding to Violence Against Women and Girls, 2011, and Secretary to the Parliamentary Delegation to Iran. A widely traveled professional, he was invited to USA during 1993 and 2002 under International Visitors Leadership Program and also to Germany by Goethe Institute. I would like to request to please chair the session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you and good afternoon to all of you. It's very difficult to enjoy the session immediately after sumptuous meal. One feel like taking rest or drowsing or what. But anyway, we have a very interesting session. In fact, when I was asked to chair this session, I tried to find out what Europeana Foundation is doing. And the kind of work they are doing is probably what we are looking in India. Like they have a huge database of almost 5 million documents and audiovisual material and manuscripts and artifacts and all. And a wonderful job they are doing where they're collecting the material from different European countries. We also have almost similar kind of situation where diversified information sources and information is available in different states. Morning I was talking about collecting the Indian information, our history, our local cultural material and all. So something, we can really learn a lot from their experiment or the way they have developed their digital library. And we are lucky to have the executive director, Mr. Harry Verwayen, from the Europeana Foundation, who is, the operator of Europeana Foundation platform. Across the Europe, museum, galleries, and archives are being digitized. And they support these organizations in their digital transformation. So this is what, is an important thing we can learn from him, we can share from him. Let me invite Dr. Harry William Verwayen. Please, sir. And request you to make your presentation. Thank you. I'll go down so I can also hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chadha, for the kind introduction, and welcome everyone, dear colleagues. And I'd like to thank Dr. Pratim Das in particular for his kind invitation for me to speak here at your conference. We've been allies for as long as I can remember, 2015, when the library started. I would like to take this after lunch break to tell you a little bit about what we do at Europeana and how that relates to the NDLI initiative. Okay. There we go. Yeah, you got it. How we relate to the NDLI initiative, and I'm also going to make a bit of a plea to you that you're doing fantastic work, and I think the program that I've seen for the next couple of days is tantalizing. But I also think that we risk missing the boat if we do not accelerate quite dramatically in the next couple of years. And to illustrate that, I'd like to give you a little anecdote just to warm you up a little bit after lunch. So I have two sons, and one of them is 15, David, and my second son, Nicholas, is 17, closing in on 18. And he happens to be closing off his school career. And as you do, you imagine yourself, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? To answer that question, I need to take you back a little bit. When he was 4, I think I asked the first time, what would you like to be when you grow up? And the answer at that age, I think, is pretty universal. As a boy, you tend to want to be a police agent, right? Or a fire brigade, or perhaps an astronaut. At the age of 6, when I asked for the second time, we got a surprising answer, my wife and I. So we're walking down the street and we ask him again, so what would you like to be when you grow up? And the answer was then, quite surprisingly, I'd like to be a paleontologist. We were quite surprised he even knew the word. He's got some very smart friends. But it was interesting. So he developed his own fields of interest, which in that case, of course, was dinosaurs. That's why paleontologist came up. 2 years later, again, the answer was even more surprising. We asked him, what would you like to be when you grow up? And the answer then was, a garbage truck man. Of course, there's nothing wrong with being on a garbage truck. It's very important work. But it was surprising after the paleontology story, right? It happened, so why would you like to be a garbage man? And he said, because they only work 2 days a week. So that tells you a little bit about the perception of young people growing up. And right now at 17, he's got absolutely no clue. He's got absolutely no clue, like I did, and perhaps you did when you were that age. And yet I think we need to continue asking ourselves, what do we want to be when we grow up? And I still ask myself that question. And to illustrate my point, this is an anecdote about uncertainty. Oxford University published last year a study which provided us with a scenario where in 2050, 47% of the jobs that we have today will not exist anymore. That's a lot. Some of us will be retired by then. But my son absolutely has no clue what he's going to be trained up for. And I think that is really the topic of my presentation today. So, okay, I need to do it this way. When we talk about digital transformation, we need to investigate with ourselves, transforming into what? When we look at the numbers that we're facing, we've got about 300,000 books accumulated in the course of history in the world. And millions of video, millions of data, a couple of trillion of web pages at the moment. And the question is, what do we do with that in a digital environment? And I think that is really something that we need to dig deep into if we want to have a role to play in the future. So in order to investigate and interrogate that, we all do reading, don't we? And this is a stack of book I read last year, at least the best part of it. And I think some of you in this audience today will recognize it. So I want to take you through a little journey of investigation to understand what we're talking about when we talk about digital transformation. So one of the two books I enjoyed most reading last year was Sapiens. I see lots of you nodding. Can I actually see a show of hands? Who's read that book? Can you just show me? Yeah. So that's quite nice. So Sapiens is an amazing book. If you haven't read it, you should absolutely read it. It tells us the history of humanity. And it takes us all the way from the 13.8 billion years ago at the Big Bang, and then takes us to the 100,000 years that perhaps Homo sapiens has been in existence. And it takes us to the very last 12,000 years afterward, after the last ice age, when agriculture started to emerge, and with it, culture. Culture as we know it today in written form. So it tells us a little bit about, where we are on the scale of things, right? Now, when we talk about digital, we're only talking about the very last 40 years of that. So we're completely entering a new world. Early 1990s, the World Wide Web started to emerge. Google only in 1998. It's hard to imagine. It didn't exist before then. We have Facebook in 2004, iPhone in 2007, social media coming up right after that, and here we are. And in 2015, 40% of the world population is connected to the internet, and that is growing daily. So we're right in the middle of a storm, of a revolution. And the second book I really enjoyed was the sequel to Sapiens called Homo Deus. So Homo Deus takes us into the future. And the proposition that Yuval Harari makes to us is this is going to be an incredibly interesting age where technology will play a very prevalent role. Never before has there been a convergence of technologies this powerful at the touch of our hand. And it's the convergence of parallel computing power, big data, and smart algorithms that's going to dictate the course of action. Now, what we need to ask ourselves is, what does that mean to us? How do we play a role in that new space? And for that, I'd like to take you to my final reading point that I invite you to read. This is an article, really, that blew my mind. And it's an article by a gentleman called Kevin Kelly, who you may recognize from the Wired magazine. He's one of the founders of that organization and magazine. And he's written an article called Mirror World in the March edition of Wired. And in that, he paints a picture of a 3D world, a new platform that is emerging. And he brings it in line with the revolutions. First, we had the World Wide Web. Then we had social media. The next emerging platform, perhaps in the 10, 15 years that we're going to be in, is going to be a world where the physical world will be machine readable. Everything around us will have a digital mirror component. It will be annotated. We will be able to investigate it. We will be able to talk to it and interact with it via all kinds of technologies. And that is a world that has a very strong attraction to us because it will allow us to create 4D environments, perhaps even time machines, that we can allow ourselves to go back into the world. And he calls that even that history will not become a noun anymore, but a verb. You'll be able to swipe through history by the touch of your hand, using your devices and interrogating the world as it used to be. Actually, I was fantasizing about that world when I walked down Delhi last night. I was in the Imperial Hotel, and you could just imagine, how interesting that world would be if you could have all the data accumulated and digitized from our national libraries, archives, and museums, and connected to that space. So I wanted to bring you in that bigger vision, that space that we're entering in the next 10, 15 years. And I want to do that with a reason, because if we're not moving fast enough, we're risking missing the boat. We only have 10, 15% in Europe of all the GLAM material digitized, was the latest calculation in 2017. And with that, we're not keeping up with the pace that is required to enter this world. Now, I was sitting in the audience before, and I saw Jill Cousins talking, my predecessor at Europeana, and she said, it's great to have all these big visions, but we need to take small steps. And I fundamentally believe that that is the way to go. So I want to take you through a couple of strategies that we're deploying at Europeana to see how we could get into that space. And I want to make the final point that we're entering a world that is full of possibilities, and I love the idea of a time machine. But as we all know, we're also part of a challenged world, a world that is infested with fake news, where you don't know what truth is anymore. Perhaps we're living in information bubbles, a world that is dramatically challenged. And for that, I think it's critically important to keep very close to the values that we've always held here in national libraries, museums, and archives. So we're entering a new space. We need to be very close to ourselves and true to ourselves in how we enter that. So we're questioning ourselves, what is our role? What is the NDLI's role in that world? What is Europeana's? So To give you a little bit of background on Europeana, we entered this world 10 years ago. That was right after Google entered Europe. It was a very nice proposition. So Google came and said, Oxford University Library de Bodleian, the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, the Rijksmuseum, do not worry. We'll come in and we'll digitize all of your material. It'll cost you nothing, and you'll get a copy of that. How does that sound? And that sounded pretty attractive in the beginning, but pretty soon people started to realize in the library community that that was a bit of a challenging and perhaps even a false hypothesis. What would happen if one privatized or private company on the other side of the pond would decide that French or Dutch would not be relevant anymore to their data strategies? So the European Union at the time took a very bold decision, in my opinion. They said cultural heritage is much too important to leave to commercial companies alone. We need to have a stake in that. And that's how Europeana emerged as a networked and a network place where the commons, the common good, was the prevalent business model that we wanted to get across. So with that, we started. We're now an organization with 55 people in The Hague. That's the one I'm responsible for. But much more importantly, we represent a network of currently 2,600 individuals and a 3,700 and growing group of libraries, museums, and archives in Europe that contribute to this effort. How do we enter this space? It's a question that me and my team ask ourselves every day. It's hard. It's hard work. We all know it. We have crappy metadata to deal with, legacy digitization that is too small to actually use. We have high expectations from stakeholders that we maybe not be able to manage. We have scalability issues all over the place. And we're usually drastically underfunded, aren't we? So this is how we look at the world. This is a model I took from McKinsey. It's a fairly old model. But the prevailing architecture of this is that you always need, as a successful organization, to operate on 3 different horizons of operation. The first one is the core service. That's where your bread and butter is. But if you can only invest in that, you will miss the boat in the next 2 years. So you also need to extend that with small innovations. And finally, you should not keep out of your sight that there's a completely new world and competition coming up right after that. So that's your horizon 3. So I'm going to take you through a couple of strategies that we deployed in Europeana in each of these horizons. So the first one pertains to what we call the core service. And it may surprise you, but the most important part of our core service at Europeana is the community. Yes, we have a service, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but we believe that our ability to deal with the problems of the future is embedded in that community. This is a picture of the community of Europeana, like I said, 2,600 people in our network. And you'll see that it goes much further than only Europe. And I think India is missing here, but we do consider you as a very important partner in our network. What other things do we think of when we look at our community? So this is the breakdown of people who came to our conference 2 weeks ago in Lisbon. A conference very similar like this one. And we had close to 300 people there. And we found out that half the people were completely new. And the other half were returning visitors and part of our network. And we thought this was a very strong sign of a resilient community. You have the people who come there every year, who've been here for the last 10 years, but we also are still able to attract completely new faces and completely new insights. The second thing we found was that there was a very interesting breakdown in the interests of people. So as you can see, close to 30%, a third, had a strong tech interest. But that means that the other 2/3 were looking at copyright, research, education, communication, and impact as their main interest in being part of Europeana. Now that was striking to me. I would have thought that tech was a bigger issue. But when we did a survey afterwards, when we asked what are the biggest blockers for museums, libraries, and archives to participate in the digital transformation, guess what the breakdown was? Technology, less than a third. Funding, 2/3. And all of them had a problem with skills. Skills about how to talk to their funders, how to talk about impact, what kind of copyright labels should we apply across our collections, and more generally, how do we use that for education and research? So that informs us in telling us how we need to proceed further. I want to also share with you how we scale up. So the whole model of Europeana is based on the idea that we have very strong partners across Europe in principle, but also beyond it. So at the beginning of this year, you see that we had 31 what we call accredited aggregators, knowledge hubs, both in the member states of Europe as well as domain-specific aggregators, so experts in video, experts in libraries, experts in fashion, for example. And this network we have been able to grow to close to 37. As you can see, we added 2 Nordic countries, Finland, Latvia, the Middle European countries, the Czech Republic, the France Moteur Collections, and Manuscriptorium, again in the Czech Republic, and completely new, and we're very happy with that, Ireland. So our best strategy to scale up the amount of digitized effort or digitization efforts and what you can do with that completely depends on the network infrastructure we're able to facilitate and nurture. That has led us to the following numbers. We have close to 60 million items now in Europeana from close to 4,000 institutions. Now I want to make a point today, and I'm conscious that we're seldomly making it enough, that all of this is also an effort and the resultant of the relationship we keep having with the policymakers that also fund us and support us. And I actually think that you're better at it than we are in Europe. I think we're sometimes a little bit hesitant to make that connection. But I wanted to show you that cultural policy has had a dramatic positive effect on the Europeana endeavor. And how does that work? In Europe, it works through what they call Commission recommendations. So this is the European Commission recommending to member states, but that is a pretty hard recommendation, that they should also contribute one way or another to the policies that they started devising. So in 2011, the recommendation was about the digitization and online accessibility of cultural material and digital preservation. This is the European Commission trying to create a multiplier effect on the things that they're doing. In 2017, a report on that came out. And what we've seen is that 75% of the member states in Europe, for those of you who are not familiar, there are 28 up to now. We still have Britain. They all made an effort to work on an aggregator in their own country. 33% make even publishing on Europeana a mandatory effort of any funding activity they make in their own national settings. And 50% use rightstatements.org. I'll come back to that little point later. But I think, looking back at this, that this is a model that could, I think, also help the NDLI and other initiatives across the world to be more powerful in the way that you exercise your fantastic work. So that was on the scalability, on the community side of things. We're also aware that we need to revamp our online presence. And here we feel stark competition with some very strong commercial players. How do we attract users to all this fantastic content that they may not be accustomed to? And are we actually able to do that? So some of you may be familiar with our website. We've completely revamped it. And I'm going to take you through a little demo that we presented last week. And I invite you to visit that and tell us what you think. Little background, we increased our visitors by 13.4% last year. I had a little side discussion over breakfast this morning. We said, what is a lot of visitors for us? Is it 6 million? Is it 10 million? Is it 1 billion? We don't know. It really depends on the setting, doesn't it? So what we're interested in is to see, can we design growth strategies? Can we pilot new things that make us more relevant to users, and also more relevant, therefore, to the collection holding institutions that have provided the material to us? So the design for all the activities that we do follows this little pattern. This is our trajectory of change. We have our performance indicators. For those of you who want to know, that's about 500,000 visitors a month. But more interesting to us is what kind of pilots can we design to make growth happen? What kind of experiments? So the demo is really built on that. And I'm going to take you through a couple of the more striking differences from the previous version. The first of all is that, as you can see on the right-hand corner, we now have teachers as a central user group for us to reach. This is the homepage of Europeana at the moment, by the way. So if you click on that, you come into the Europeana classroom, and here you'll find learning scenarios. And these learning scenarios are contextualized for specific learning experiences for different age groups, and also for the different curricula that we have in Europe. The most important part on the back end that is different is that we are building this website based on the notion of increasing browsability through entities. So with entities, I think we're going to talk about a little bit more later on. They come from the context that we can get by hooking up with DBpedia, Wikidata, and so forth. And if you do that, here you're on the art page, you can see on the right-hand side that you will be served with new ways to explore. Perhaps paintings, perhaps theater, perhaps music. So if you would click on Use It, you now come on a collections page, and you can find also all kinds of filters that can help you in your browsing experience. For example, you could search for sounds or only for openly usable material or material of certain qualities. The landing page, the item page of an item will look pretty much the same as we've used to, but we've tried to simplify that. And the reason why we needed to simplify it is not just from a pure user design perspective, but also because we're facing some serious multilingual issues. And the simpler we can make this, the better we can start solving that. The most important thing is that the search is now 50% faster. That was the one big drop-off we saw in the previous version. So if you're interested in this, and I'd seriously like to hear your opinion, please go to demo.europeana.eu. Right. So that was the part that is still known to us. That's the core service. We've been doing these type of things for years, and we feel that we need to do them better. That is the strategy we need to do. We also need to extend that core service with new innovations. So the most important thing for us here, and I think that is also where we found our relationship with NDLI so prevalent, is that we believe in standardization. The more we're standardized, the more we're interoperable, the better we can serve the world with the material that we have. So for that, we needed to find definitions of what we mean by, for example, quality. The key thing there for us, this is really the central document that we live and breathe, is the Europeana Publishing Framework. Now, this will be too small for you to see, but if you look it up, you can find that we've designed a framework that says you can participate in Europeana with relatively minimal efforts. We want to be as inclusive as possible. But we set some minimum standards for that. And if you want to do more with us, that is absolutely possible. And if you do, we can do more for you. So the higher the quality of the material you give us, the more open it is, the more cool things we can do with it. We can help you participate in educational courses. We can help you participate in social media activities, give it ups, and so forth. So this is really the backbone of everything that we do. We've also made that machine interpretable on a technical level, so we've got a media service now that interrogates all of the 58 million metadata items and technical metadata about the content. And we're now able to provide all of our providers with that type of information. How good is your quality? How open is your material? Where do you stack against others? And that becomes a very powerful mechanism to support these institutions in their own endeavors. This is just a breakdown of where we are from the 58 million items. You can see 40% is still in the lowest class of material that we have, relatively small, and one of the 14 licenses that we use. But increasingly, tier 3 and tier 4, that's 31% and 9%, 40% is open and high quality. So that is the strategy that we've designed. We want to have a lot more of that type of material if we can. We've extended that framework with a metadata publishing framework. So here we can talk about what is good metadata. And I know some of you are specialists in this room. So what good metadata is for us is largely depends on the amount of attributes that you can attach to it. What kind of language is it? What kind of context is it? Is it attached to any thesauri? And with that, you can basically create points for yourself and increase in the ranking of our metadata. So those two frameworks help us to have better conversations with our data providers when they talk to us about, what can I do with Europeana and how can you do something for me? A new terrain we're entering in, 3D, that has become quite the talk of the town. Monuments and sites, but also in museums, statues and so forth. How do you replicate that in a digital environment? What kind of search mechanisms do you need to deploy for that? What kind of rendering do you expect on a site like Europeana? So these are the types of things that we're working on now. We do that through task forces, and we'll come up with recommendations. We're also talking about impact a lot. And we've designed, again, a framework, an impact framework that I think is being used wider and wider in our communities. And we're trying to figure out, what are the things that are really making us happy? It's certainly not more usage per se or more content. What are the types of things that give us evidence that we're doing a good job? So here we have a lot of anecdotal material, right? And I'm sure you have a lot of that yourselves. Here the Director of Collections at the Finnish National Gallery told us something that we found very interesting. About the role that Europeana can play in accelerating the discussion about licensing policies. That makes us happy. That also has a very immediate output, as Partha already said. 10,000 objects from that institution turned from a Creative Commons license to CC0. And that allowed us to do a lot more with that type of material, beautiful paintings from the 18th and 19th century. But more importantly, we know that something changed in that institution, that they're changing their practices and the way of thinking about digital strategy. The second example I want to give you is an outreach activity. We've been doing a lot of that with Europeana. We try to work with real people on the ground, as I call it. This was an effort from last year, and it was about the topic of migration. I'm sure you know that that was a huge topic for the past couple of years in Europe, and I'm sure it is here in India as well. And that debate was a very one-sided one. It was a very polarized one. And while we don't believe Europeana is a political organization or should take a stand in it, we do believe that we have a role to play in making heritage relevant to that discussion and to change the way that people perceive these types of things. So we've invited in 11 countries people to share their stories and their objects about migration. And we found some incredibly surprising ones from people you wouldn't normally label as a migrant, talking about migration in their families and how it changed the way that they looked at things. They shared all that material with us, we digitized it and put it online. And what we found, we did really a fairly deep impact study, is that it not only the act of sharing that material didn't only give us new material, it also changed the perception of the people who shared the material and who receive it. And I'm just highlighting one. From the people who participated, 56% had higher levels of self-esteem about their story of migration. And I think these are the types of things that we should be interested in with national and digital libraries. So those are two elements where we feel we need to do a lot more work. You know, how do we make our service better, but also how do we engage with communities on the ground better? So let's talk about how we take our work global, and this is where you come in. Europeana, we see ourselves really as a network of networks. We work with lots of communities. We're very particular about who we work with and how we work with them, but we do believe that that is a role that we need to play. So we work with the Wiki community very much, IIIF, but also with national and international initiatives such as Japan Search, Digital NZ, DPLA of course, and obviously with the NDLI. One particular area of work where we're very focused on is the adoptions of rights statements. So the Rights Statement Consortium that NDLI is a member of, a founding member, as well as Europeana, has designed a number of statements that we can apply across the sector to talk about where Creative Commons doesn't apply. And these licenses are now being picked up. It's a global consortium of 6 members at the moment. And we've now have a 28 million items in collections across the world have actually applied those licensing statements. So we think that's a big success, a sign of success. And we need to intensify those cooperations. We've already been told, we were here, we the consortium, and some people from Europeana DPLA, to work together with NDLI on a workshop on the adoption of rights statements in early September. And I've been told that that was a great success, that the libraries involved were very interested in both applying the rights statements and also in general to learn about rights. So we also understood very deeply that in order to make rights statements work, you need to act on a local level. So we're already published in 7 European languages, and I'm very happy to pre-announce that Hindi is now becoming our 8th language that we're going to be publishing this in. And I think that's really fantastic work. Thank you very much for all your efforts. Yeah. I think that brings us to 600 million people across the world who read Hindi, if I'm not mistaken. Very good. That brings me to my very last notion. Innovation. How do we get to the levels that we can actually participate in the world that is evolving and developing under our eyes at the moment in garages from Silicon Valley to Calcutta? Here we work together with a very interesting new initiative called Time Machine. And Time Machine is a consortium that is a partner with Europeana, and it foresees to design and implement advanced new digitization and artificial intelligence technologies to mine Europe's vast cultural heritage. So I think it takes Europeana to the next level. This mirror world that I was talking to you about, this world that is developing in a digital form in relation to the physical world that we know, and that will be marked up, that will be machine readable. How do we create a 4D component to that, so that when that world starts to become established, we can actually create that layer on top of it that we feel so proud about and that is relevant to the world of the future? So what kind of architecture do we need in order to build that? So here we started to design worlds like this, and we're trying to figure out how we can create an R&D department that develops deep learning and machine learning to create new tools to work with the library and museum world so that they can speed up and accelerate tremendously the digitization process, so that we can create big data of the past, as we call it, and start feeding into these local time machines, as we call them. We believe that there are 5 key components to that, and I'm going to take you very quickly through them. This is still R&D and work in development. The first one is we need to develop cheap and efficient both 2D and 3D solutions through maybe called digitization hubs. Like I said, we believe that only 15% of the cultural heritage has already been digitized at the moment, and that is not nearly going fast enough if you think. It took us 20 years to get there. How do we do that? Secondly, we need to develop innovative data storage solutions. We're talking now about DNA perhaps being the next storage solution in the future. We're not talking about petabytes of storage in rooms anymore. And we'll need that if we talk about big data of the past. So that would be the first big innovation that we're working towards. Secondly, and the previous speaker talked already a lot about that, thank you for that. How do we create an automation of markup? We're still living in the library world with a lot of human efforts that are needed, and that becomes a bottleneck for the speeding up of the markup that we need. How do we create metadata out of this? How do we create speech to text from all that? Handwritten text recognition, indexing and retrieval solutions. Those are the things that our R&D departments in computer sciences should be working on. The third one, I've already touched upon, we're just going to continue that. Interoperability standards. But how does that work for 3D? How does that work for storage need for 3D in works? Is that something that we need to host centrally or in a distributed form, but outside of the premises of libraries, museums, and archives? Big things to think about. The thing that will make everything work in a 3D environment, we believe, are 3 simulation engines. Large-scale inference engine that will stitch all this information into a 4D pattern. A 4D simulator engine that manages the possible spatial temporal simulations comparable with the data, so that you can actually see things grow and diminish across time and space. And finally, a universal representation engine that will manage these 3D representations when the data is dense enough, because the density of the data will be key in the 3D world. And finally, and we'll hear a lot more about this from Dr. Sarah Kenderdine in the back of the room, how do we create human-computer interaction and visualizations that will make this interesting and immersive experiences for the people who are working with that material? So those are the 5 architectural questions we're asking ourselves, and we're creating project proposals for that in the European context, and we'd be extremely happy to work with you here in India on some of these problem spaces. So we're left with a number of questions. We know what we're doing in the short term. We have a hypothesis of what we should do in the midterm, and we only have a vision for the long run. So before I make my final statement, I'd like to open the room up for a few questions.
It was a very wonderful presentation, and we're looking forward to its expansion or extension. A couple of months back, I had an opportunity to have and interact with the efforts taken by Stanford University, which I saw that Tom Fremer and that group, they have worked with that III format. And when some other group in other countries, as you showed a map of various initiatives across the world, when individually you all are working in various countries, how do you stitch these things together, or is it, duplicating your efforts? How do you use from each other?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's true that in a networked, an organization that is by design networked, duplication of efforts is a very strong concern. We are part, for example, of the consortium of IIIF. I'm actually on the board of IIIF. So those are the types of things that we discuss on that level. So we have working groups, task forces. Now, in all honesty, we will have some duplication. It's a bit unavoidable, but we need to keep in close communication with the leaderships of those types of initiatives. Yeah.
But I think content will be unique, no? Content will be unique, geography specific.
The content will be unique, absolutely, yes. But for example, one of the things we're working on now is how does IIIF work with 3D? And here we've connected the 3D community with the community at Europeana who's working on standardization for 3D. And together they come up with a new solution, and that's how the thing feeds itself. That's the idea.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Gentleman in the back.
Yeah.
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
Yeah, my query is, it's a wonderful presentation. So there are various users are there. So how or what is your planning for users to talk with each other? Suppose you are talking about the immersive learnings. So if two users are interested in same topic, how do you track them and again bring them together so that they can read and this? So they will be able to use the library better.
Yeah. So if I understand correctly, it's about you can have users, but if two users are interested in the same topic, how do we bring them together?
Right.
I think I'll park that one under number 3, innovation, for the moment. Right now, our website is not equipped for that. We've got a lot of other things on our roadmap that we need to tackle first. But user interaction with our website will be on the next round, annotations and so forth, creating your own collections. But creating conversation spaces within the Europeana environment is not on the roadmap so far, but it's definitely an interesting project to look into. Yeah.
Thank you.
I was just curious to know why you needed to write your own right statements. When I thought the Creative Commons license had a lot of brains going behind it and come up with a list of statements from which you could actually very easily bring out the set of things that you needed to do. So what was it that you thought that the Creative Commons license lacked, that your set of statements brings in?
Yeah.
And whether that would have a cultural and a national issue, because what could be legal in your place could be completely acceptable and illegal in another place. And that would be a norm, because Creative Commons license otherwise seems to be doing the job. So I was just curious about that.
Yeah. The answer to that question, and I'm not an expert on this by far, is that Creative Commons you can apply to all material that you have the rights on. You need to own the rights in order to apply a Creative Commons license on something. Now, of course, for the large majority of the material that we have in our libraries and museums and archives, we basically don't know who the owner is. We don't even know who the author is in many cases. So that is the compartment of material that we need different rights statements for.
Which is why I asked the question, because that would mean that we are, like for instance, if you take a museum, that most likely has an artifact where it's been plundered by somebody and then donated by somebody else. Okay, so nobody owns it except, like for instance, I have something of Indian heritage right now in, say, the British Museum. So who owns the license for that? Should it be in India, or should it be now as per the right statements of yours? And that's why I asked this question.
You think it's, okay.
The context and this.
Okay, so the context might be perhaps a repatriation question, correct?
Not repatriation,
Oh.
but
Who will own it?
Who will own it? Yeah. Yeah. Well, for the moment, if the British Library digitizes something, they're not necessarily the owner, but the caretaker of it, and they need to decide what kind of license they can apply to it, right?
I think we are having a full session on these
Yeah.
issues. So that is there. Partha said in the morning itself. Yeah. Yeah. So we can have a. Correct. Yeah. We'll discuss in that session. Yeah. We'll able to discuss.
Probably
Anyone
better.
else?
Copyright demands its own session. Yes,
Somebody is
please.
there? Yeah. If you introduce yourself also.
I'm Virat. I'm from Sabarmati Ashram. So my question is, you are digitizing lot of things. I mean, that includes, museums, paintings, and I mean, a lot of different things. So do you have any, I mean, you must have, come out with specification standard of digitization of various things. So do you have any plan to, make it open source, I mean, freely available to the people? Because lot of people who are into digitization works, but they, really not knowing how to, use the technology or what is the right things they should do. So do you have plan to share those things?
Could you be specific? Share what? The knowledge about it? Or?
Specification of the, specification and standards for digitization.
Okay. Okay, so to make it a little bit complicated, Europeana doesn't digitize anything. We collect the material. So what we do is create specifications for if you want to share your material with Europeana, here are the things that you need to do. So we're not experts in digitization standards per se. However, we're now, in the next couple of years, going to build competence centers in Europe, which are going to be about the digitization process, in particular for 3D and monuments. And that material will be available for everyone, always under open standards, for sure. Yeah. So.
Oh, thank you. I think we have to wind up the session.
Yeah.
You want to make some statement before I thank you for?
Yeah, I do. Very quickly, if I can go back to my slides. There we go. This is a slogan from a gentleman called Bill McKibben. And Bill McKibben is known as a journalist and an environmentalist. I'll remind everyone that this week is also in Madrid the big climate conference. And I think a statement that really struck me, both in the sense of what we need to do with climate, also applies to us. Winning slowly is the same as losing. We will not be able to play a role of relevance if we do not speed up our efforts. So I would encourage you all to create all the work that you can, share it widely and openly, and really do your best. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Harry.